Welcome to the Art Against Mental Illness podcast. My name is Alex Lovelace and this is my podcast about the healing powers of art for artists, art lovers, the art curious and anyone with an interest in mental health and well-being. Hello again. Welcome to my studio in sunny Scotland. It's freezing cold in here and the room is dusty as hell, but I wanted to do this episode from here because this is the place where I do most of my learning, and this episode is about learning. And so if you hear some noise in the background, I'm guessing there's going to be car sounds and there will be voices and various other things. It's because I'm in my studio and there's very, very little barrier between me and the outside world. This place has almost no insulation at all, so it's always cold and it's always noisy if it's noisy outside, and I hope you'll bear with me if you're on audio only. If you prefer, I've recorded this as a video as well, so you can tune in and see my lovely face talking at you for the next however long. That can be found on YouTube. I'll put the link in the show notes. But yes, hello. And so here I am, and I'm going to talk about learning. Why am I going to talk about learning? Well, because this is a podcast about art and mental health, and there's always a trajectory between beginning a particular hobby or pastime or creative activity and then becoming proficient enough at that you can really use it to benefit yourself, either from a mental health perspective or from a financial perspective or whatever. And I'm actually in the process of learning a new skill at the moment. This is not particularly unusual for me. I've been experimenting for some weeks now with wood carving. Just before Christmas I bought myself a rotary tool, which is this thing here with the end there, and for those who are just listening, it's like a small orange drill thing with a little power tool with a long extension on it that has a drill bit on the end, and this is used for carving or engraving or etching into wood or metal or stone or whatever, and it's really good for making patterns in wood or carving wood to a particular form. And I bought this on a whim, and I've since been teaching myself how to carve wood and what all the difficulties are with it and which bits to use to do what job. And I'm teaching this largely to myself. And this is what got me thinking about learning, because I'm what you call an autodidact, which is a really simple word for someone who teaches themselves. Now, I always thought this was a bit of a ridiculous word because I've always been that way. I've always been the sort of person that learns on my own steam, on my own time, my own way. And I just assumed everyone else was the same way. But it turns out that really isn't the case. People have very many different ways of learning, different styles of learning. Some people like me have a strong preference for self-learning. Some people need very, very explicit instructions before they'll try anything. And some people sit in between. And I think it's really important to understand how you learn, because especially if you're going to start something new, understanding how it is that you learn, what your particular learning style is, will be instrumental in and probably absolutely critical in your ability to learn anything new. For the purposes of this episode, I'll be focusing on creative endeavours, but honestly, this same set of stuff should apply to anything you feel like you need to learn, be it a programming language, a foreign language, accounting, electricianry, whatever, with some caveats obviously, which I'll come to when we get to them. But I think a lot of people think they know how to learn, but have learned someone else's method for learning. And so when we are at school, certainly in the UK, but I think pretty much everywhere, there is a certain style of learning and teaching that caters very much for the broader array of students, the centre of the bell curve, if you will, the style of teaching that's going to reach the maximum number of students in terms of how they need to learn. Pretty much the average way of learning. Now, I'm painfully aware that there are deficiencies in this view, particularly in the UK, that the standard way of teaching and learning is the optimal way for the maximum number of students, or even any of the students. But I'm going to put that debate aside, really, because I don't know enough about it. But strictly speaking, I couldn't agree more. But it's perhaps for another day or another podcast. Let's just assume the predominant form of learning is broadly the best way for most students. And that's effectively turning up to a building where someone with some level of expertise on some subject stands in front of you, guides you through the principles and the various subject areas of any given discipline, and sets you exercises and homework, and then tests you on it. But the problem is that if you take me as an example, that's almost completely anathema to me in terms of learning. There's a reason why I'm an autodidact, partly because I simply can't be taught. I'm ADHD, I'm autistic, and sitting me down in front of someone talking at me is going to be very, very counterproductive. I simply can't pay attention. My mind constantly wanders, and I get bored and irritable, and it really affects my mental health quite badly. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is the dreaded PDA, the pathological demand avoidance. And this is something that I only really realised about myself quite recently, is that I can't be told what to do. I don't want to be like this. I didn't choose to be like this. I don't know why I'm like this. But when someone tells me to do something, regardless of how much I already want to do it or not, as the case may be, I immediately don't want to do it on being told that I need to or have to. And it's made my life quite difficult for my whole life, and I've got various coping strategies. For example, if someone tells me to do something, I will change that task just enough to make it feel like I decided to do the task. It was my task that I was doing, and therefore I can do the thing that the person wanted me to do or asked me to do, like my boss or someone, and yet still maintain my sanity and not lose my shit. And so we've got this double whammy: is I can't pay attention, and I can't be told what to do, and so school for me was brutally difficult. And I was in the remedial classes for most of my school life. I was put in classes where they took us aside and gave us much easier things to do. They thought that I was learning impaired. They took me for all sorts of tests, including eyesight, but never, funny enough, autism. And ADHD in the UK wasn't really a thing. This is in the early 80s onwards. And so I was sort of sitting around, not really doing much, wondering why all these other kids were in like history classes and so on, and we were drawing pictures and reading really, really simple books for students much younger than us. And I didn't really understand it, but I also didn't really care. It didn't seem to me like what everyone else was doing was particularly interesting or fun, and what we were doing was fun. And it wasn't until right into secondary school, when I was like 13, 14, 15, that I realised at some point, after being heavily bullied and disappearing and trying to blend into the background so that no one noticed me and decided to make my life difficult, I realised that I wasn't stupid. I realised that actually some of the subjects or the disciplines or the skills that some of the other kids around me who were considered smart had, I just found easy. And so what happened was, in the space of 2 years, I went from, for example, the bottom maths group to the top maths group. I was never going to compete with the best mathematicians there because I'd lost so much time and I was playing catch up. But broadly, what had happened there is, one, I was deliberately trying to disappear, blend into the background and not be noticed. So I just got my head down and did things and tried to sort of pay attention and learn things. And at that point in schooling, coursework was a big thing in the UK. And so a lot of the learning and the outputs were self-directed and allowed us to sort of choose the projects that we did and how we went about doing them. And for me, that was perfect. So I just got on with it, and I really excelled in maths and science and various other things, including art. And everyone was a bit surprised, like how did this kid go off and either sell his soul to the devil or get some sort of magic intelligence injection. And bear in mind, I'm pretty certain I'm dyslexic as well. I'm an August baby, which meant I was the youngest in the year. ADHD, autistic, heavily bullied. It was little wonder that I didn't excel. I was in a year group where everyone else was effectively older than me, and most of them much older than me, and I would struggle with everything was taxing for me. And so eventually I figured out I wasn't stupid, and leaving school was a huge thing for me. But it wasn't until a bit later that I realised also that what else had changed is that I'd understood how I needed to learn things, and this was a bit of an epiphany for me. I could just go and learn things, and we had these things called libraries, and this was before the internet was really much of a thing. And I just went and started hoovering up information and figuring out what it was that I liked and what I was good at. Eventually, for God knows how, found myself in IT, and eventually being a sort of programmer, analyst, data scientist, all these things, all of which I taught to myself. And I developed a method for learning, which was along the lines of, say I wanted to learn a new programming language, well, I would go buy the book on it, learn Python, learn JavaScript or something. I would skim through the introductions of each chapter to familiarize myself with the things that they thought I needed to learn, and then I would simply start developing, making code. And this is the only way I found that I could learn. I would start doing things, well, how do I do this then? And I'd try and do it and it wouldn't work. And I would go, I know I can do this because I saw it in the manual. So I'd go jump into chapter 6 and say, well, how do I do this? And then I would just get on with it. And I fundamentally learned by making mistakes. I learned by hitting barriers. I kind of need to make mistakes. I can't be told to do things. If you tell me that the right way of doing something is the way I have to do it, I'll deliberately not do that until I figure out for myself why that way is the right way. So I make a lot of mistakes, but I tend to make them quite quickly. What comes with ADHD is hyperfocus, which is the ability and the compulsion to focus on one thing that captures my interest for long periods of time and work on it absolutely frenetically. So I start hoovering up information and work really quickly and make mistakes really quickly. To coin a phrase that's now starting to have real negative connotations, I would move fast and break things, or fuck around and find out. You can do that when you're learning a programming language or a new artistic skill. Doing it to the American economy and the American society is probably less advised, but well, we're all going to find out whether or not that works in the very near future. Anyway, I sort of started to apply this approach to anywhere I could. And when I started doing art again about 7 years ago, it was obvious. Art and creativity is the obvious way to apply this type of learning, because if you want to paint a picture, get a canvas and start painting, right? And I learned things by going, well, that didn't work. What did I do wrong? Let's try and figure out what I did wrong. If I could figure it out, I would fix it. If I couldn't figure it out, then I've got the internet these days. I've got books. I can ask for advice. And so that's how I learn. And I didn't realise until relatively recently that was called being an autodidact, and apparently that was a thing, and I was one of them. Fine, I'll take that. It is what it is. But why isn't everyone else that way? So I've met plenty of people who need to have a certain structure around them to be able to learn, that cannot or do not feel like they have permission to move forward on a subject until they've been told by someone how to do it and given permission to start doing it. So these are the sort of people that fare a lot better in school. And some people are quite extreme on this front, in that they simply are almost frozen until someone tells them specifically, explicitly what to do, gives them permission to do it, and explains to them all the risks and the benefits and blah, blah, blah. So they wouldn't decide to write a short story and then just start writing it. They would go off and research writing short stories for quite a while before even setting a single word down. And that's crazy to me. I don't know why you would do that, but then people who are like that tend to look at me going, why did you just dive in? That's mental. That's just completely crazy. But I can't learn their way and they can't learn my way. We're just not wired like that. And so there are spectrums in between there, and there are all sorts of learning styles that may or may not align with neurotype, that suit certain people and that suit certain lifestyles. And for example, if you're very time poor, you probably don't have the luxury to take the very considered, very slow and a methodical uptake of a new skill. And especially in things like professional situations, you're going to get thrown in the deep end. And you'll see that in that environment, a lot of the people that are the ones that are most successful are the ones that can react and learn on the fly when given new and difficult situations. That's not necessarily the best thing and doesn't necessarily result in the best people being promoted, but this is the world that we live in. Anyway, my point here is that when you're starting something new, it's really worth stepping back and taking a little bit of time to think about how it is that you learn and how it is that you're going to learn this new skill based on that. You're going to learn how to write short stories, and there's probably a somewhat linear approach to this. I've done this myself, whereby you sort of understand structure, plot, you refresh your understanding of English grammar or language usage, you try and increase your lexicon size, and you go out and you try and stimulate yourself to come up with ideas if you haven't already got them. Maybe you'll join a writing group, maybe you'll take a class and get instruction and then follow a sort of linear path set out by a particular course or a particular instructor. And quite honestly, the whole learning economy is set up to support that type of learning. And if you're like that, then good for you. You probably just want to take the normal path. But if you're like me or have a completely different learning style to me even, then you probably need to think a bit differently about taking up a new subject. Now, you can't always, like I did with the wood carving, just plough in. There are certain things, like, for example, you decided you wanted to be an electrician. I definitely do not advise going and fiddling around with some of your electrical cables and wiring in your house to see what works and see what doesn't, because you'll probably find pretty quickly none of it works because you're going to electrocute yourself and you're going to die, right? So there are obviously caveats to this where you do need to take some prior learning. The same rule still applies here, and I think you still need to figure out the right approach for you doing that, and maybe researching training or educational paths for that particular area is wise, and seeing which ones are most appropriate to you. But I'm going to assume that you are smart enough not to decide that you want to fly a plane without an instructor or go skydiving without an instructor. These are not clever things to do. But if you want to start lino cut or painting or writing or drawing or performance or any of these things, there's an element to which you can just get stuck in and just have a go. And then from there, what is your strategy? What happens when you hit a barrier? What do you do? How do you problem solve? How do you usually go about these things? So think back on projects that you've done before and think to yourself, well, I had to learn this thing and I had to learn it quite quickly. How did I do that? Well, I did thing A, B, and C. Now, maybe that particular learning experience wasn't representative of what you're trying to learn now, but there's a thread that runs through the way that our behaviours are and the way that we learn, and you will find similarities. And maybe the best thing is to hunt through your memory for something that you did that was a little bit more appropriate to the current task. But either way, you're going to find methodologies, heuristics, behaviours, and various things that help you to understand how it is that you learn. As I said, I'm no stranger to learning. I'm always learning something new. It's a bit of an ADHD thing. I get such a buzz and a high out of learning new things. There's almost a certain melancholy to it because I tend to realise that I don't stick with anything for that long. And I'm way into wood carving now, but it's just as likely in 6 months' time I'll suddenly have decided I'm going to sculpt sea life with dried cow dung or something, and some of these skills might transfer, or I might just be on a completely different kick, and that's fine. I get it. I wish I was a bit better at following through on things, and if you'd listened to my last episode on the beauty in repetition, you'll hear me talking about some of this, but I can't change who I am. And I've tried to learn things many, many times. For example, I play the guitar. I'm not very good at it. I've been playing since I was, I guess, 12 or 13. So, like, a long time. I learnt initially with my friend Jason in his bedroom. We were trying to play the music of our shared guitar heroes. And at that point, I was quite into my virtuoso guitarists. So these are like the hardest people to try and copy. Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, people like that, the real shredders of the late 80s and early 90s. Jason is an incredibly gifted guitarist, and I say that very advisedly because I've said here before, and I'll say it a lot in the future, there's no such thing as talent. You might be born with the aptitude to do something versus someone else who has less aptitude or less ability or less physical ability or less psychological, emotional or intellectual ability. But one way or the other, learning how to do something like playing the guitar takes a lot of effort. And some people say, oh, you're really talented, as if that means that you just sort of picked up a guitar and you can whittle away at 1,000 notes a minute. And oh, well, that was all very easy because you're gifted. No, Jason has the right mind for it. He's got the right mentality, the right emotional makeup. He just found learning the guitar a lot easier than me, and I found it really, really, really brutally hard. And to see him progress as we grew up, it was quite daunting. But he would always try and help me. He would try and teach me, and I think I was a very difficult student. So let's learn how to play this. Let's learn how to play that. And I really couldn't do it. I found it really, really hard. I don't read music, but we had what was called tablature, which is effectively, it sits above the music stave and tells you which strings to press on which fret on the guitar. Anyone can read it that understands the basics of playing guitar. But even then, I just couldn't focus in. The numbers would sort of swim around the page, and I couldn't remember the thing that I was supposed to hit between looking at the page and looking at the guitar and where I was putting my fingers. And I found it would cause me immense amounts of stress and difficulty and headaches and all sorts of things, simply trying to learn something that someone else played. And I don't have the type of ear that means I can hear what they've said and then just play it, other than the most basic things. Jason went off. He's in bands. He does performance. He does singing. He was on TV. He's great. He does that. That's his thing, and he's still an incredible guitarist. But for me, what I learn is that I just really can't, and I don't really want to learn other people's stuff. It's just too laborious for me. So I taught myself how to improvise, and that's what I do. I improvise. I pick up the guitar, plug it into an amp, plug in one or other of my effects pedals, and just wang around, making a god-awful noise. And I'm not great, I probably don't sound great, but I have so much fun doing it, and I've got much better. I've progressed in my style and my ability, and via that I learned a lot of the theory that I've been missing because I find it boring or too abstract or whatever. Again, I'm not great on music theory, I'm not a great guitarist, but I understand way more now than I did before. And it all came about because I learned how to play the guitar via just doing it. like just plugging in and seeing what happened when I did this or did that, and smashed the strings like here, or plugged in this really gnarly distortion pedal and turned it all up to number 11. I just loved it. And one of my favourite things to do, funnily enough, is just to create feedback. So I've got a few pedals that are really high gain, and I can just create feedback with my little Vox speaker. And to everyone else, that's horrible noise, but I find electric guitar feedback beguiling, like beautiful, like a ephemeral, keening beauty. Why is learning how to learn so important for taking up or progressing in any creative endeavour? Well, put simply, if you're trying to learn in a way that doesn't suit you, it's not going to be pleasurable, it's not going to be fun, it's going to be stressful, it's going to take longer, and maybe you just give up. Maybe you think, this is not for me, this is not my medium, I can't do this. When the reality is, almost certainly you can, and that the reason you are failing at learning it is because you're trying to learn the wrong way. And that makes me sad that people are giving up things because they feel more difficult than in reality they are. And some of the biggest leaps I've made have simply been stop trying to do things how I'm being told to do them by the mainstream education, and to figure out and sit down and figure out what my way of learning this needs to be. And for me, I even love the task of figuring out how I'm going to learn something, because yes, you can't just dive in. It can be wasteful. If what you want to do is learn how to carve really expensive woods, well, you're going to have to start on cheap woods. Don't just dive straight in and buy a 500 quid slab of absolutely gorgeous hundreds of years old wood, because you're going to destroy it. You need to strategize and say, well, right, let's find some wood that's cheap but of a similar, say, consistency or color or whatever. Let's go and buy some cheap canvases and just slop around. Let's buy a cheap guitar, let's buy a cheap violin, just good enough to do what you want, and start fucking around. Lowering those barriers to entry is a really big starting point. Maybe that's not the best way for you to do it. You need to think about it, and I like to think about how I'm best going to learn something. I find it really positive and stimulating and exciting to think through, well, here's what I understand about this thing that I'm going to do. I rarely try and start something without some knowledge, otherwise why would you start it? But I think to myself, how am I going to learn this? Where do I start? Where is best for me? How can I do this without creating havoc, mess, spending lots of money, annoying everyone around me, and so on? And I'll put in a little bit of thought and planning at the beginning, just simply so when I start, I'm kind of as best near I can to being frictionless. And then the next thing you have to do is accept failure. And this is arguably the most important part of any learning endeavour. It's really important that you are not too critical, and especially in the early stages, and that when you hit a barrier, that's natural. When you don't know how to do something, it's natural. When you can't make your fingers form that chord, that's natural. You will be able to. You just have to keep pushing on. Don't let it get you down. Don't be too self-critical, and just keep pushing on. And if you can't do that thing, leave it for a bit. Go away, try something else, try some different exercises, and try and find some way to loosen yourself up so you're able to come back and try that thing again, and then you'll almost certainly figure it out. And don't beat yourself up over failures. It's really, really bad to do that. And when you think about it, when you first start driving a car, you can't expect to get in there and doing some Dukes of Hazzard, A-Team style jumping over bridges and stuff. You have to. Jesus, I'm showing my age there. You need to understand some basics. You need to start slowly. You need to understand that you're going to stall every now and again. You need to not get yourself too worked up and try and relax. And once you've sort of got those two things, how am I going to learn this? And this mentality of failing, and just remember how important failing is, because that's how you understand where your boundaries are, and also how you know when to go and ask for advice, or to go and study some more, or to try different things because you've got something wrong. There's very, very few people, if any, that have just started up a new endeavour and just sort of intuited their way through it without making any mistakes. When you learn, it comes in fits and starts that are based on simple physics, to your energy levels, to your emotional state, to your life circumstances, to your ability to find time and to make sure you've got the right headspace to practice something. This is all natural and normal. So the learning process is not linear, and in fact it might roll backwards. You might actually get worse at things before you get better. For example, if you've trained yourself to do things in a certain way and you figure out that way is really not optimal, it can be quite difficult to train yourself out of that, but it's worth doing. But in the meantime, you're going to find that you get worse, and you just have to accept that. And I think that's another really important acknowledgement, that you won't learn linearly. And how many times have you been learning something and there's been this one thing you couldn't do and it was really bugging you, and then one day you get in front of your easel, you pick up your instrument and then you just do it. And you're like, wow, I could do that. What happened? I must have gone to sleep last night and had some amazing epiphany. But of course it's never like that. It was linear when you think about it, but that was the first time you came to your practice and all the right things coalesced. You were in the right state of mind, you had the time, you were relaxed, you weren't worrying about it, the way you set up your instrument or your easels or the new brush you've been using, or just not being tired or not being irritable, and suddenly you can do this. And it was a whole collection of circumstances that have led you to be able to now do that thing that you couldn't do before. So that's, I think, all I'm going to say about learning. This definitely won't be the last time this comes up. It's one of the most critical and central things to my core thesis on the value of art to mental health, and my belief that one of the biggest barriers to us really using creativity to maintain our mental health is the barriers we put up for ourselves, the problems that we cause for ourselves that stop us from progressing. And yes, there are always external factors. Yes, there might be things that you simply aren't configured to do. But ultimately, most things you can do if you think you can do it. If there's no obvious impediment, then you almost certainly can. And when it comes down to it, if you're failing at that, it's almost always because of barriers you've created. So the positive side of that is that these are things that you can fix. The barriers can be removed. And sometimes you just need to take a step back and think about how you're approaching something and make some adjustments, maybe take a breather and reevaluate what you're doing, and then attack it with fresh vigor. So that's all I'm going to do for today. Hope that was helpful. I'll be back soon. I have an interview that will actually cover off some of this stuff in a completely different domain. It's a really great interview, so I really look forward to sharing that, probably sometime in the next week. Otherwise, enjoy yourself, and especially if you're in America, keep safe and keep fighting the good fight. You matter. Bye.